Siege is a modern continuation of Rainbow Six, a novel that Tom Clancy wrote back in '98. Rainbow is an international counter-terrorist group. They began as an American-European collaboration in the novel, which slowly developed and increased in size from different organizations across the globe. With a series spanning 21 games, the franchise is no joke, and with the acquisition of Red Storm Entertainment in 2000, Ubisoft has been in charge of the IP. Now, tell me this. What do you get when you cross a tactical thriller shooter series with Ubisoft? You get a really good game, and no, that is not a joke. With every update of Siege comes a new operator, often from a new country, bringing something new to the table and representing a different facet of peacekeepers. Although Siege's gameplay is constantly changing with balance patches, new additions, buffs, nerfs, and almost everything you would expect from this kind of live service, its fundamentals have remained mostly intact. Although Hostage was the initial intended way of playing, Bomb is the current primary focus, and that's what I'll mostly be touching on. On a very basic level, it works pretty much like how Counter-Strike does, albeit a little more confusing. The game is a 5v5. There are 2 bomb sites on each map. The attackers have to plant a diffuser in one of these sites, which will defuse the bomb automatically a short while after it's been planted, unless the defenders either kill the attackers or disable the diffuser after it's been put down. This will never change, but what changes is the process by which this happens every game. Though it does sound a lot like Counter-Strike, it is far from it when you actually load in and play. In its current state, I think Siege is in a more dynamic state than it's ever been. I'm not a pro, so this perspective may be skewed, but I find the sheer abundance of gadget variety, of map approaches, and of synergies allows for the exact kind of tactical gameplay people have wanted from the beginning. It is not tonally consistent, but when it comes down to pure gameplay, it is incredibly strategic. Though some gadgets have been hit or misses, the addition of every new operator allows for a new approach. And with the operator count now being 74, that's a lot of potential. Being a first-person shooter, most people will obviously think about the shooter part. Gunplay in Siege is important, but the gadgets are what are intended to set these gunfights up. The positioning of a gadget to block off an area, to damage an enemy, to get information, all of this feeds into how the gunfight is going to go. It allows for game sense and secondary features like gadgets to matter over sheer mechanical skill much more than it does in a lot of other shooters. The game's emphasis on gadget use is interesting because despite many situations where game health is weak, the direction of balance changes shows that Ubisoft still wants utility to be primary, not secondary.
Oh, they're coming into sight, I think. They smoked.
Whether this actually works or not depends on the season. Obviously there's plenty of understandable criticism, but once again, I'm looking from a fundamental perspective and I'll leave discussions on balance to people more qualified. But what I will say is that it is a very difficult task to balance the gadgets and gunplay, and Siege struggles with this a lot. This huge pool of variables means that every round goes very differently. People clown on esports for taking away from regular gameplay and for dictating too much of the game's artistic direction and balance, and I agree with this. But at the same time, mechanically it does act as a very good demonstration of just how versatile Siege can be. Teams respond to each other with varying aggression, they can excel in response to certain playstyles and fall short at others. You may notice that they may not be the most insane at aim all the time, like say Counter-Strike pros, which sounds strange in a game with one-shot headshots, but they make up for whatever they lack in aim with their adaptability and strategy. There is no set routine except whatever creative plans the teams come up with, how they work together to execute them, and how those plans may change on the spot depending on the enemy team doing the same thing on their end. Because of this, gunplay itself is decently simple. Your aim while hip firing is virtually non-existent, whereas firing with sights aimed down provides near laser accuracy. The sights themselves don't try too hard to be realistic, instead being very simple and readable with specific magnification. Grips allow you to customize your shooting experience based on your skill level, without being substantial enough to give you a huge advantage if you're better at aim. Many guns have very controllable recoil. This encourages a more careful playstyle, at least in concept, where the result of a gunfight may not come from someone's aim, but who is aiming their sights down first, and where that person came from. An operator shot in the body normally takes a second or two to die, allowing for a huge advantage to whoever was firing first. This is countered by the game's one-shot headshots. The main complaint I've seen brought up with one-shot kills is that it feels antithetical to the game's more utility-heavy focus, but that isn't really the case. Although Siege does emphasize gadget use, that doesn't mean it's devoid of requiring mechanical skill. One-shot headshot isn't a perfect mechanic since it does give an advantage to guns with high fire rates, but removing such a mechanic would turn the game into a more run and gun type shooter with a lot of strafing and a focus on whatever gun does the most damage. The other factor that arises is that the one-shot kill is not necessarily going to be an advantage to more skilled players. It also benefits a worse player since they only need a lucky shot to the head. But that isn't necessarily a bad thing either because again, this puts way more emphasis on your positioning and tactics before a fight. It's a very delicate situation because the headshot does dictate a slow and careful playstyle, but there's always a chance it'll result in unfun deaths from spray and pray. It feels like a necessary mechanic and one that's incredibly fundamental to the game, and it's what allows clutches to happen at the cost of more randomness. The simplicity of the gunplay can be a detriment to its balance, but making it any more complex runs the risk of it not relating to the game's utility side. If gunplay was made more difficult and complex, what's stopping people from simply getting very good at that and then ignoring the other facet of the game, and vice versa? As it is now, the simple shooting is not perfect, but it does feel necessary for the game in order to balance it out with its gadgets. And of course, there is the fact that getting a kill just feels really good. With only 5 enemies to fight against, taking one out always feels satisfying, like a substantial blow against the enemy team. Being a live service game, your approach has to shift in some way with every change. No longer being able to cook frag grenades was a change I strongly disliked. But it did mean I had to learn to use them as a distraction or to force someone away, rather than as a simple killing tool. It made me use the grenades in a way I hadn't really bothered with before. The introduction of a gadget like Deimos Tracker meant I had to be more careful about getting spotted by surveillance in the prep phase. Even if the attackers are not using him, his very existence will affect how I play. The issue with this only spawns when it reaches an oppressive level, and while Deimos' gadget is admittedly stronger than I would like it to be, it hasn't really had a huge chokehold on the game like older characters have had before. This rarely makes strategy completely redundant. You can still do a lot of the same stuff even if things change, whether that be rushing into a map with a blitz train or placing a claymore through a drone hole.
It sounds like a train too, Jesus Christ.
Every operator comes with one distinct gadget and a pick of a general one. These gadgets are one of the biggest factors that dictates how a round will go. There are gadgets for breaching, for information, and for hindrance. While the sheer number of gadgets can seem intimidating for a new player, the game's still limited to just 5 operators per team, which gives you time to learn unfamiliar enemies over the course of your time in the game. As time has passed, operator gadgets have gotten more visually goofy, but I'll get to that when I talk about visual design. More notably though, Ubisoft has been designing these gadgets as counterparts to existing ones. It's understandable because with this many operators, there's only so much you can come up with while staying balanced and familiar for new players. For example, Aruni's laser gates, while being a kinda unique form of utility denial, serves a very similar purpose to Jaeger and Momai. You can see this philosophy in a lot of newer operators. Ram serves a very similar purpose as Sledge, though she functions at longer ranges at the cost of a harder limit. Grim flushes out players similarly to Gridlock, but he can do it at longer ranges with precision, at the cost of not slowing down or damaging players. At the end of the day, a lot of the operators all fall under the same umbrella, but their seemingly small variations and niches allow for way more experimentation. Certain kinds of hard breaches are better for certain situations. You may want a more methodical, slow breach over a fast one. You could have more long-lasting cameras at the cost of subtlety, or vice versa. And all of that is not to say that there aren't original operators, because as I was about to finish this script, the new operator was revealed and she is quite something. An operator who controls 2 separate robots that she can swap between. And as crazy as this gets compared to the original operators, it is unique. It is a big shift from the fundamentals that a lot of operators have been based on. It's a way to incorporate some form of teleportation mechanic without having actual teleportation, and I think that's cool. And I do hope that we get more unique characters like that soon. Despite the tonal whiplash and inconsistency of the gadgets from a style perspective, their complexity and their interplay with each other is a fantastic promotion of coordination and strategy. The number of operators and the different roles that they have gives you some incredible versatility and plenty of options to play in your preferred way. Every gadget has its own skill ceiling. You could place a Valkyrie camera in the corner of a room. You could destroy a wall and place it between 2 of them. You could break a piece of furniture and hide it there. Every gadget is incredibly versatile to the point where even the most stupid, dumb-looking and tonally dissonant ones have excellent depth. Pair this now with map design. Siege operates very unlike many of its competitors, because while Counter-Strike and its many offshoots and inspirations have a somewhat pronged map design, with smaller linear paths funneling into the main sites. Siege maps are buildings. They have rooms, hallways, and dead ends. There are hiding spots, open areas, and most notably multiple floors. Breakable hatches and staircases are littered around every map, with some floors being destructible, because one of Siege's most unique aspects is verticality. Siege maps are incredibly destructive.
We're remodeling. What is holding this thing on?
And learning this physics system is vital as you make new angles and access points for yourself. Breaching walls and moving past enemy reinforcements creates this back and forth between attackers and defenders that you won't really find elsewhere. Defense is not just a matter of killing attackers, it's literally defensive as you set up traps, cameras, reinforcements, and barricades. The importance of vertical play makes me even more confused as to why the game will not let you look all the way down.
I swear, every time I play Buck, I feel like a fucking traffic collision victim who has a neck brace on because my neck is so fucking stiff.
The game's map design effectively gives both attackers and defenders two approaches each. Defenders can choose either to anchor on site or roam, while attackers have to choose which to deal with. With a ticking time limit, attackers can either roam clear, making sure their approach is careful and precise at the cost of time, or they can focus on the site, which saves time but creates the risk of a flank. Defenders locking into sight make their positions more predictable and makes it unlikely for them to escape if need be, but too many roamers means that the site is undefended. And that creates this cat and mouse game where players might hunt each other down using information tools, form strategies from multiple approaches at once, and make decisions based on what the enemy is doing. It's a really fun, fundamental gameplay loop, especially when you add in the sheer amount of variation that gadgets give you. This makes room for a lot of personal expression. There are so many windows to breach, so many rooms to go into, so many angles to throw a grenade from, and so many walls to bounce them off of. Pretty much everyone can play the game. Even if your aim's bad like mine, there are plenty of operators that make up for it via their utility. You can carry a match without firing a single round just by providing valuable intel. The ability to view surveillance after death means that you're not going to feel helpless even if you don't respawn. Combine that personal expression with the above mentioned teamwork and the whole game becomes your sandbox.
Thank you, brother.
Diffuser is active.
Pinto,
Protected
where
at all
Pinto?
costs.
Going in. You're welcome.
Op 4 eliminated.
I'm not too bothered by any particular maps in Siege, with an exception or two, but I do think the direction of its map design and balancing is far from what it used to be. One of my primary complaints with Lair is just how completely monochrome it feels. Yes, the rooms and all may be visually distinct, but not exactly in terms of color and layout. Despite being this villainous underground lair, it's just a building filled with rooms. Its design and layout feel competent enough, but there isn't enough of a distinction for it to really capture my attention like other maps have. You can kinda see that the direction of map design has slowly moved away from more unique shapes for the sake of a more consistent experience. Emerald Plains and Coastline are theoretically sort of similar maps. They've both got floors and hallways that branch off into rooms by the sides, with an open middle section where you can view the first floor from up top. But why is Coastline so much more fun? There are a couple of things at play. Firstly, Coastline is way simpler. Though this image may make the map look intimidating, playing it you'll never really get lost. The hallways are spacious and grey without much interruption, so it's easier to keep up with your surroundings, especially when you compare them to the more colourful and decorated rooms. Meanwhile, in Emerald Plains, everything on the second floor feels visually noisy. The hallways have gone from a visually coherent foundation to just another danger zone. There are windows and angles everywhere, these dividers come up in the hallways, and said hallways feel more like rooms themselves. It's not a bad layout by any means, and you can learn it, but it just feels less dynamic to play on, far more claustrophobic. These differences come hand in hand with size. Nighthaven Labs and New Hereford, while not bad maps in my mind, are colossal. And because both bomb sites are limited to one floor, it means a lot of other sections of the map effectively become dead weight. They add complexity for no benefit, they become spots for rats to hide in and waste everyone's time. Compare this to a map like Chalet. Minotaur 4005 has made an excellent video on the game's map design, and I pretty much fully agree with him that it's the game's best map, specifically because no space is ever wasted. If sites in the basement, there is a direct method of entry from outside, that being the garage door. But spots on the first and even second floors are still useful. On the first floor, you can do vertical play from above site to prevent defenders from holding up the garage door. There's also a staircase there that just goes directly into sight as well. Meanwhile, on the second floor, defenders can watch the first floor to prevent this from happening. Smart attackers can even use some clever gadget tricks from the second floor to mess things up. Though there are still rooms that may not be in use if side is in basement, they're not an issue because the map simply isn't big enough for roam clearing to be impractical. It is possible that a roamer may be far away from the side all the way up on the second floor, but the floor simply isn't big enough for clearing the area to become unbalanced. It gives space for roamers while not giving them too much. Visually, it's very clear. The minimal but cozy architecture makes for a very readable map. While I do understand this philosophy for more standardized room-heavy design, there is an appeal to the smaller and more unique map layouts that you can't really get with them.
It's through the wall. There's a hole in the wall, I think.
Last operator standing.
Plane is far from a perfect map, but it feels unique, and you approach it with this methodical forward-moving clearing that feels unlike any other map. Canal divides itself with distinct narrow hallways between sections, leading to more tight encounters without the whole place feeling like a mess. The division between sections means that both attackers and defenders going to the dead side of the map is much less practical. It's this uniqueness between maps that the game feels like it's missing, and I do hope we get to see that come back. Movement in Siege is heavy and a little slow, but not enough to be bothersome. Running lets you cover more distance at the cost of making a lot of noise. Outside of that, other forms of movement such as leaning left and right, crouching and proning on the ground allow for more advanced movement in the heat of gunfights without becoming overtuned. That point on running leads into the last bit I would like to discuss, that being sound design. The sound of quiet footsteps, of a reload, of certain gadgets being used are all directional. It makes your listening ability incredibly vital, and even if you haven't fully learned what certain characters do, you can still ascertain the direction of their sound cues.
Op 4 eliminated. Mission successful.
Being able to tell when someone's behind, above, or below you just via a few shuffling feet honestly feels great. It's simple to grasp, and as you play more, you get a sense for exactly where a sound came from and what to do about it. People coming in from other shooters where sound is important are gonna feel at home. What you get from all of this is a game with a low skill floor and a very high skill ceiling. It's not very difficult to discern the direction of sound, but as you play more, you're able to piece together what sounds originate from what gadgets, and learn to respond to them appropriately. It's one of my personal favorite aspects of the game. Playing too carefully means you may be slow on the uptick and waste time, but making an effort to move quickly makes you incredibly vulnerable. The same logic can be applied to the rest of the game. The actual act of shooting is very simple, but it's game sense and skill that lets you start with an advantage in those situations. Quickly discerning where a sound comes from will give you an edge, even if you're not particularly good at aiming. I'd like to show some appreciation for the game's general soundscape. Nothing here sounds out of place, every destructible has an appropriate sound, every object and material feels just right when shot at. Fluorescent lights will hum, car sirens will go off when you shoot them, glass shatters loudly. Gunfire is loud and can be heard from across the map. Explosions will rumble the building and send debris scattered everywhere, papers fly about and lights flicker. EMPs make electronics in the environment shut down, not just enemy gadgets, even if they don't serve a gameplay advantage. The feeling of physical interactivity in Siege is fantastic. The destructible environment, the ability to punch and blow your way through walls, and all of the unique gadget animations are genuinely incredible. They lack the distinct quirkiness and stylization of animation that you find in games like Valorant and Overwatch, in exchange for a feeling of professionalism and skill. Operators install reinforcements on walls like they've done it 1,000 times before, with a very effective sense of weight as you push against the lever and lock it in place. And it means that I've held F against a wall or a hatch countless times without ever once getting bored of it. The fact that every round on defense starts like this and it's never frustrated me goes to show just how well made every animation is. You reload with efficiency and precision, saving your magazine if they have ammo and tossing it out if they don't. The sounds and mechanics of rappelling upside down give a sense of weight and danger in spite of how mechanically simple and fluid it is. The sound and feeling of controlling a drone is able to carry forward its weight and size while still giving you complete control over it. Another factor is the ticking clock. The psychology of every player going through a round is fascinating, and it creates a pace and intensity that feels very difficult to otherwise replicate, even in other shooters that I've played. Hearing that thumping as the round comes to a close, as that 1v4 turns into a 1v3 into a 1v2, is a feeling like no other. Every animation, every sound in Siege is incredibly refined. My enjoyment of the game obviously doesn't mean it's devoid of flaws, because that's how it is for every shooter. For every match where I feel on top of the world, it will be followed up by me wanting to flatline. But I do wonder, how much of community perception is dictated by the game's visual language rather than its gameplay? Tom Clancy is rolling in his grave. I hear this said all the time, but hey, he isn't. You know why? Because, well, for one, dead people don't do that, but also he sold the name, he sold the title, he has no actual right to it. He was not passionate about the future of the Rainbow Six franchise. I think it was important to note how well designed I found the gameplay to be, because we need to consider what was gained and what was lost. In exchange for this abundance of gadgets and approaches, we lose what some claim to be the immersive experience. Night versions of maps are no longer a thing, the game is generally far less atmospheric, and tonally it can feel really inconsistent.
I think the only reason people have this idea that Siege was more quote-unquote tactical back in 2016 is because they didn't run into bolo peeking yet. Chances are they encountered bolo peeking and then they just stopped playing. When I first started playing the game in 2015, my overlap was with Counter-Strike. So when I got to this game, I didn't really care about realism because it's a game. It seemed like over time, the game has tried to get back to its roots mechanically, but artistically, it doesn't line up. So there's this insistence that the game is losing its roots.
Those who claim that they miss the old Siege don't necessarily miss the gameplay, they miss the visual identity. Old characters having strong scopes and guns and being overpowered was something people would complain about back then, but now it's an endearing meme that people actually say that they miss. How many of these opinions are fueled entirely by nostalgia? I think that what people want is not a certain character being broken, and neither is it true realism. They miss a grimdark aesthetic and art style. I feel that to understand Siege's tonal imbalance, we need to define the terms realistic and grounded. Siege is not realistic, and it never was, not even on release. Siege operated under an approximation of realism. Their intention was never to make a game like SWAT, with breaching tactics against advanced AI with hyper-realistic complexity and gunplay. Siege was always designed to be a PvP shooter first and foremost. The audience that grew up with stuff like the Vegas games would probably feel more at home with something like Ready or Not. The truth of it is that most players don't want Siege to be realistic, they want it to be grounded. The world must operate and stay consistent within its own logic, and back when the game first released, that logic was an elevated but still tactical shooter. Siege was never a documentary, it was an action movie. But action movies are a spectrum. On one end we have John Wick, on the other end we have John Wick 4. And right now, the artistic direction of Rainbow Six Siege is John Wick 20. Siege is far from an ugly game. It is over 9 years old and it still manages to be beautiful. I really shouldn't be surprised. Ubisoft has crafted some of the most visually impressive set pieces and locations in all of gaming. Border is abandoned, its ornamental architecture and carpets are set out to prevent anything from looking barren. You can almost envision how much dust you would get on your hand if you swiped it across a railing. Coastline is luxurious and beautiful, but very clearly not in use, with trash scattered across the floor and the swimming pool drain. Chalet is incredibly cozy, a getaway in the mountains where you can see other distant buildings and the many vehicles and sites someone on holiday would make use of. A newer game like Ready or Not clearly has more graphical fidelity, but you can tell it's an indie game by comparing the level of detail within. Not everything is about how good a place looks in lighting and reflections, but also what's included, what's actually within it. I think that detail is part of why Siege's visual fidelity has never really faded. For every terrible map to play on, there is some beautiful visual accompaniment. The loss of night maps was necessary. While they are a massive hit to the game's identity and tone, playing in the dark and effectively doubling the storage taken up by the maps is not fun. Everyone says they miss it, but if they did add these back, you would find Twitter and Reddit filled with clips of people crying about getting shot from someone in the darkness. It is still a loss, but not entirely a fault of the game. People who get nostalgic about classic Siege may not realize how different the gaming landscape is now, not just in developers but in communities. Many of the changes to Siege, which have come at the cost of its tone and art style, were necessary, but that is not to say that Ubisoft was completely helpless. A night map does not necessarily have to be dark. Favela is set at night and it remains bright and readable. It's entirely possible to craft a grimmer, darker atmosphere without sacrificing gameplay, but it's clear that they simply don't want to bother with that additional effort because the art style has already shifted into something unrecognizable. Let's talk about character design. The original Pathfinder uniforms are not particularly realistic. The SAS uniforms, for example, are decades old, but these are not there for their tactical function but for their iconography. Rainbow is meant to be an international counter-terrorist force. Their uniforms would realistically be consistent. But for the sake of both gameplay and diversity, operators don't wear designated rainbow uniforms, but rather their own respective CTU clothing. This makes them more distinct in-game and also makes the purpose of Rainbow as an organization more clear. This is meant to be a gathering of the best from across the globe in unity, and making separate country CTUs distinct allows for a better showcase of the different and yet similar ways that counter-terror units dress and operate. The gadgets operated under a similar elevated logic. Jaeger's gadget is a comically shrunken version of a missile interceptor, Bandit's car batteries are ridiculous,
I did drugs.
Pulse's heartbeat detector would never work, and Blitz's original video was this. Not to mention the fact that a lot of these gadgets, such as Fuse's cluster charge, would be war crimes to use. What matters is not necessarily whether they would actually function, but more so how much their presentation suits the game's tone. Despite being completely unrealistic, Pulse's cardiac sensor is presented in a very simple, tactical way. He pulls out this bulky looking camera that does a sweeping scan every few moments. He holds it like a professional who's done it 1,000 times before. The light tapping sounds and greenish filter almost make this impossible technology feel vintage. The visual presentation and sound design of this absurd gadget make it feel like a genuine piece of technology that such a CTU would actually appropriate. And I think that for a lot of its older designs, Siege does this very well. So when do the issues start showing up? When does it start to feel wrong? When the presentation of these gadgets goes too far, when our suspension of disbelief is shattered. And I think the clearest example of this is Yana. Yana's design is far less initially believable than any we've seen before. Her armor feels straight out of Star Wars, just smack on a helmet and a cape or something. It's too angular, too smooth and form-fitting, its shoulder pads too impractical. Combine that with a gadget straight out of a completely different series. Compared to other gadgets, it's not necessarily the most absurd since we've had LOI holograms before, but in presentation, with its laser sounds and hovering drones, Yana is just too much. All this being said, I think that most operator designs have been nowhere near as bad as people have claimed. Yana feels more like an outlier than anyone else introduced, with a couple of exceptions. But the simple fact that these operators are unrealistic does not make them devoid of any redeeming qualities. In a game with so many playable characters, it can feel like there are only so many CTUs you can depict before the uniforms and tactics start to blend together. As such, newer operators have diversified, not merely in their nationality or gadget complexity, but in their organization. I think it's a very cool development that Siege branches out Rainbow from a simple CTU to a group that pulls from many subsets of peacekeepers, such as rescue EMTs with characters like Ace and Thorn, bodyguard work with Azami, and even a conservation NGO with Melusi. The latest operator, Skopos, represents a very real up-and-coming aspect of military and police work, that being the use of robotics as replacements for humans in dangerous situations. This is, quite surprisingly, not out of the realm of possibility, and it's far from the most futuristic thing that the game has done. I personally think that the Boston Dynamics-esque gimmick is really cool. Their design is meant to reflect at least some believable analog technology with buttons and bulky power units housed inside of them. Something that I think people fail to realize is that this is not reality. The training missions are, at the end of the day, training missions. Is it something of a flimsy excuse? Yeah. But seeing people complain that someone like Fenrir is using a gun feels absurd. He's not going to actually do CTU work anytime soon if his lore is any indication. In terms of lore, he's on the team because of information he provides and the technology that he develops. His existence in-game merely facilitates that. You could argue Rainbow is giving him arms training. But it's a little disingenuous to assume every operator is going to be playing a real-life CTU role if Rainbow was real. Because of course they wouldn't. Some sacrifices have to be made for the sake of gameplay. You don't really see people complaining about why Overwatch characters fight alongside their mortal enemies and face off clones of each other. Valorant tries to tie that in with its lore, but it's an extremely goofy premise. My favorite character design would probably be Flores, because he represents a middle ground between Siege's darker thriller aspect and its more elevated action shooter elements. Organizations have hired thieves and criminals before, often as consultants or to do what they're best at from the other side of the wall. Flores is Siege's interpretation of that. His design is simple and has personality. His red glasses and cap give him a distinct silhouette, as does his very comfortable looking coat. At the same time, he's got some armor on so as to look practical. He would not realistically operate alongside fully armored CTUs in an operation, but his existence within Rainbow justifies his existence in-game. Characters are not realistic, but quite often they try to feel that way. This allows for referencing real-life military and police uniforms while also giving more room for creative liberty. How much these creative liberties should extend is an interesting question. When an operator is designed, they're meant to represent their respective country, so how many changes should one make till it becomes disrespectful or disappointing? A lot of operators take as much of the primary iconography of their respective inspirations as possible. Nook is the clearest example, donning the uniform of the Danish frogmen. It's a very faithful recreation with only a couple of minor changes. On the other hand, we have a character like Grim. Being Singaporean, I was interested in how they would pull off a Singaporean operator, so you can imagine my disappointment when he turned out to be a member of Nighthaven, the game's fictional PMC, rather than being the proper rep of our actual military. Outside of his headset, he does not look like a Singaporean soldier whatsoever. I'm also not sure why he's written as a cold and emotionless killing machine, but I guess that's Singapore's vibe. Rainbow Six Siege has an art style. It used to have a better one. But there was only so much it could do. There were only so many grimdark type characters that they could design. I think the game could look better, and in its current skin-filled state, it is definitely in a worse position artistically. But I also think that the issues with that art style are blown very much out of proportion. With every new operator, people cry and laugh and scream at their lack of realism when we had Amaru almost 5 years ago, and when characters like Jaeger and Pulse existed from the very beginning. To be quite honest with you, it's still nothing like Call of Duty, and I think that for now, the game is slowly reaching a balance between that realism and that style. From the combination of sci-fi and analog of Scopos robots to the edgy but stylish costume of Deimos. And we will talk about Deimos. The depiction of Rainbow Six felt like a post-Cold War alternate universe, a sort of macro-utopia of international cooperation, something that feels less likely with every passing day. At the start of the story, the evil forces are convenient nameless terrorists. I find it somewhat confusing that people want the white masks to return because they are so obviously nothing burgers. They are placeholders, representatives of some generic terrorists that we can kill without moral scruples. They are literally called the white masks. These guys only existed back in Situations, which has since been replaced by a new tutorial system. The white masks were a relic, and they were never interesting as a story villain. The issue is not that Siege abandoned a good story, it's that they never had one to begin with. Siege lore has never been particularly interesting. My favorite parts of the Rainbow Six novel were never really about Rainbow itself. I respect people who commit to watching all the cutscenes and forming theories, but to me it's always felt weak and secondary to what makes Rainbow such an engaging idea. And that is the operators. The operator diversity and different origins and specialities felt like the fiction's backbone. Characters always felt written in a vacuum, rarely ever representing something about the story. Aruni was added because she's a cool robot lady. Sam Fisher was added because he's Sam Fisher. It's only the recent operators who've attempted to be lore significant, and even those are somewhat lacking. Things changed with Deimos, and I'll get to him shortly, but to understand Deimos, we unfortunately have to understand the Stadium story. A lot of people hate the Siege esports scene because its style so obviously steered the game in a worse direction. It treaded the territory of more stylized cartoonish shooters because that was the trend, but it couldn't abandon the game's fundamental look, and so the attempt is a half-hearted and incongruent mess. It is so against the game's inherent style that it just looks stupid. I have no justification for this. The premise is stupid, the visuals are stupid, the map this stylistic turn came with was stupid. The characters it introduced... Okay, Harry is actually pretty cool, but everything surrounding Harry is unfathomably dumb. To the uninitiated, the premise of the Stadium is that this international counter-terror unit is now an actual sport. The new 6, Harry, creates this exercise for team building, coordination, and the operators then take part in a tournament that simulates a regular Siege game. And for as much spectacle the cinematics and the music and the scale tries, the very premise of the story is simply too far-fetched. And it is this premise that has damaged the style of Siege to an irreparable degree. It's so bad that you can feel the resentment leaking from the game's Wikipedia synopsis. The best thing to come out of the stadium arc, if you want to call it that, is Harry. While the original Six in the novels was the macho, badass, super soldier type character of John Clark, Six has changed over the years. Six in the cinematics was played by Angela Bassett in a traditional tough and serious government agent role, feeling imposing and ruthless. Harry is different. He feels the least like a trope, because Harry isn't a military operator. Harry is a psychologist. You see, the part of Siege lore that I find genuinely interesting are all of the stories told in isolation. If you look at the information in the operator screen, you get very detailed biographies on each character's backstory, and quite notably, their psychological profiles and interview results from Harry. Alongside this are full analyses and documentation on their gadgets from Mira. And the quality of this writing is so much better than the universe that they're based within that it's frankly absurd. These biographies and written words sell the character better than any quirky CG cinematic. They become less like tropes and more like real people, their gadgets representing their personality, their specialty. Some of these feel so authentic with little notes from Mira and Harry that I almost believe they're real. That isn't to say that all of the characters are good. It's not to say that they are New York Times bestsellers. Okay, they are better than New York Times bestsellers, but that's not my point. This sort of writing can only get the game so far, and I doubt a big portion of the player base is going to spend their time reading character backstories. But with these biographies alone, the game is able to communicate personality better than any of its story arcs. And the depiction of Six as someone who looks into these operators psychologically and empathetically, rather than purely being a planner and coordinator, is incredibly fascinating. Harry's writing and focus on bringing the team together is gripping, and it is tragic that most of it is stuck in the awful trap that is the stadium. With the game's half-hearted attempts to make the mercenaries of Nighthaven threatening, with its absurd Civil War-esque setup that never got a proper payoff, Siege lore felt completely, utterly directionless. This then brings us to Deimos. Deimos represents many things, and Year 8 introduced him in a pretty cool way.
Have a look.
At what, exactly?
Well, this is how Rainbow dies.
Deimos is unlike every other character we've ever seen. His design is dark and edgy with elements of surprising practicality and realism. He is shrouded entirely in black, his design feels distinctly non-formal. And his poncho and revolver make him surprisingly stylized. Ironically, his simplicity makes him stand out more than almost every other operator. Deimos is a villain. He says that Harry disgraced his unit, that he ruined Rainbow and turned it into a joke. He gloats about the team's foolishness. And to show how serious he is, he does this.
I happen to find you exceedingly fucking boring.
Yeah, well, don't tell me when I was swinging.
So who is he? I think it's pretty obvious what Deimos represents. Ubisoft wants the cinematic to shock you. The Dark of Night is a complete tonal shift from the uplifting, weird esports scenario of the stadium. Deimos represents the old fans to a degree, the resentment at what Siege became. Kill the annoying new guy that people don't like, introduce real stakes and real terrorists again. And it works, at least tonally. Deimos is threatening, has a really cool design, and he takes Siege to a much darker place. Killing Harry was a ballsy move because as much as people didn't like what he represented, he was a charming character with fantastic performances by Andy McQueen. He wasn't Angela Bassett, but he had charisma. I was interested in everything he said or did. And you can see from the crowd's cheering of his roast of Deimos that he was likable.
I happen to find you exceedingly fucking boring.
Deimos shooting him in the heart is an effective move, one that's built up throughout this cinematic, but one that still hits very hard. And then we get to Deimos' motivations.
What comes next is the squad's fall. One by one. Every operator dies.
His goal is simply to kill every Rainbow operator, and it is when that story is expanded on that it becomes boring. Deimos is an MCU villain. He is an established character with a legitimate reason for his moral scruples, and his solution is mass murder. And with him now being captured, and with a story that doesn't seem to be going anywhere, a story that's never felt tied into the game outside of the stadium map, things don't feel like they're progressing. Special events are reskinned old ones where we could have had a perfect opportunity for some Deimos Hunt game mode. Instead, it's all relegated to cinematics, and so people who don't follow will simply have no idea what's going on. One season we have what seems like the start of some silly civil war. The next time a player boots up the game, we have some random dude in glasses we've never seen being killed by some edgelord we've never seen. I don't think it's impossible for Rainbow Six to have a good story, but I think that at this point, with the operator count closing in on its limit, it's impossible for that story to be a part of Ubisoft's Rainbow Six Siege. They clearly put a significant amount of their budget into it given the quality of the cinematics and performances, but the story is so lacking in direction, so lacking in consequence, so disconnected from the game and its gameplay that I don't think Siege will ever get to see narrative satisfaction. I don't think any other shooter hits me the way Siege does. I don't think I'll ever get into a game like this again. No other shooter feels this way even if they share the same elements. This is a PvP shooter made by Ubisoft, and you can tell from its incredible sound design and immersive gameplay to its misunderstanding of itself and its blatant flaws in both style and substance. It is, dare I say, a flawed masterpiece. Honestly, Siege is great. In some ways it's never been better. But I want to see it regain control of itself. It feels like every addition exists in a vacuum, without much regard for the rest of it, for the skill sets that it's made people learn, for the visual identity that once existed. Everything feels introduced on the fly. Stuff like the frag grenade change, though understandable from a game design perspective, just feels bad because it undermines the skill and game sense it took to land some kills. It's easy for me, a non-meta player, to go, oh, you should just buff instead of nerf, but obviously it isn't that simple. But I think that the game does feel worse a lot of the time, and I think that something needs to change. I can't speak to its meta, to optimal high-ranking play. After all I've spoken about are its fundamentals and its visuals. But I think those factors do absolutely play a part. Its fundamental gameplay is so good that I cannot think of a single other shooter that can match up to it without some annoyance. But problems still stack up. Game modes are still the same, maps are now designed to fit criteria that didn't exist before, and so these new maps are always banned in ranked lobbies. Not because they're badly designed, but because they don't feel fun to learn, they feel like the same old new thing. Its visual style has ping-ponged from serious to not, to serious again, to something in between. There is so much good to be found here. Deimos, though certainly unbalanced, is one of my favorite gaming characters in recent memory. The way his character ties into his ability, the way he chuckles and whistles as he's hunting people down, brings a power fantasy that the game thrives on, that feeling of being a hunter, of being an efficient soldier. Characters like Scopus show that Ubisoft isn't against trying something extreme, something they haven't done before. But is it enough? Is that extreme change and uniqueness enough to salvage the game? Creativity Unchained runs the risk of being stylistically and tonally dissonant, and that's what a lot of modern Siege feels like. Sledge's ability is still just a hammer, while Aruni gets a robot arm and leg, super punches and a laser gate. No Siege, I do not want to buy the Pickle Rick skin. I don't care much for being domed in the head by 2B. There is so much to find, so much to love. It is a shockingly successful title for a game that was basically dead on launch. Gaming is in a better place than it has ever been. These incredible fundamentals, that feeling of getting a headshot, of landing a C4, of blowing someone up, feels just as good as it always has. But how are we supposed to feel like an operator of Rainbow when the match consists of Rick, 2B and Master Chief in the middle of a huge Olympic stadium? A lot of this was bound to happen. There's nothing inherently wrong with licenses and cosmetics. I have some of them and I like them a lot, and as I've said, the game's base design and style does still have very strong points. It's not a problem exclusive to Siege, every game is like this now. But I wish Siege took more care into being Rainbow Six. A tonal change is not going to save the game, and neither is a good story or changes to its fundamentals. But Siege is scared of all these things, and it shouldn't be, because I think they would be a start. Every game I play seems to have this conclusion, this whole flawed masterpiece thing. There's a reason people love them. They are genuinely fantastic video games made by hardworking and talented people. Communities often get mad and engage in long arguments because the game has promise, because there is a foundation that they are in love with. If it doesn't reach those expectations, people go berserk. And Siege needs to work on those expectations, because right now they don't seem to even know what they are. They're trying, but are they trying hard enough? Rainbow Six Siege does not need to take any of this advice. There are still so many people playing this game, myself included, but I find myself becoming increasingly incapable of engaging with everything outside of its fundamental gameplay. Its aesthetics, its map design, and much of its appeal are lost. Can they be found? That's a question for the future, one with no clear answer. In some ways the game is getting better, and in others, it will never be the same again. But Siege at its heart is still Siege. And I will probably be playing this game until its dying breath.
Nothing I say will save Rainbow. You're already dead. We'll see about that.
Alright guys, we get going.
Yep. Yeah, same. He is? Oh yeah, he's just sitting outside. Oh, he's getting cooked. Let's go! Let's go! We got him! We got him!